All right. Well, Rob, it's really good to talk to you again. I know we had a conversation last week, and I'm excited to talk about revenue operations. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You caught me on a Monday afternoon. I am the best version of myself, as best I can be anyway.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Rob, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about revenue operations. Your role as a leader in revenue operations. Love to learn from your experiences, and maybe you can just guide us along the way if that sounds about right.
100%. 100%.
Um, So why don't we do this, Rob? Why don't we just start with a little background about yourself, your career, what you've done professionally, and things like that.
We can start, and I'll summarize because I know that your audience is broad, more broad than what my narrow industry tends to be. I work specifically for the last 25 years in the post-acute ancillary services space, which basically distills to providing services into nursing home operators and senior living operators and alternate care sites. So I'll try to be as generic as I possibly can when we're talking about revenue operations and management today. Right. Last 20 years, I have been leading teams. I have led teams in small and large businesses, founder-led startups, founder-led businesses, right? So 10 years post-startup, the founder is still leading and actively running the company. VC-backed startups, and I've also worked at standalone publicly traded companies.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Perfect. So that's all really good. Now I want to begin at, like if you were a revenue leader just joining a new company, what advice would you have for them? How should they think about their 90-day plan? What are the things they should be looking out for? What should the new revenue leader that is joining a company be doing?
I mean, listen, I think generally a revenue leader should be looking at the ads side of their business unit primarily, especially when they start, right? Retention is something that you'll figure out and you'll be informed of. And that's a totally different talk track. On this one, I wanted to talk about ads, right? So I want to talk about that side of the business. Um, the very first thing that I would want to do as a new revenue leader in an org is to validate the total addressable market. You need to be able to do that. You wouldn't take a job without having done a lot of research yourself. But I think once you're in the seat, validating that data and making sure you understand it is really important. So framing the market up is probably one of the very first steps that I would do. I'd probably be a nerd between meetings after and at night, really understanding what the total addressable market was, what the clients look like, and then I would use that data immediately to identify what the ideal client profile looks like as is defined today, and I would look for opportunities to ruthlessly distill that ICP, into verticals that you can just dominate one at a time and really develop a plan to do. So my very first thing, that I would recommend to any revenue leader coming in is understanding the ads side of the business first, really understanding the market, and then really understanding that the total addressable market isn't the serviceable addressable market, and the serviceable addressable market is not what the ICP is. Those are three totally different definitions, and one is most important. And having an ICP that's distilled to say three categories, a today, tomorrow, and next year, kind of, prioritization of the ideal client profile is for me what I think is most important for a revenue leader to start. The second thing, and a lot of these will be concurrent, but I think that it's really important to have done as much work as you could in the first couple of weeks to identify the total addressable market and distill in your own mind what ICP is. The second is to connect with the sales organization, the current organization, get a summary of the current forecast, and do that individual. Maybe you can do it as a group. So if you have multiple people leaders that are working in your organization, getting them together, gives you a really good opportunity first to understand the culture. And this is separate from an intro call. I think it's really important to get these guys together, men and women together in a room, a Zoom meeting, however you fashion it, and get a summary from each one of them of what the forecast is based on their spans of control, respectively. That's really important. You've already got an idea of what the goal is for the org as the revenue leader. Taking that, making the mental notes, and then taking it a step further. So once you've done that, should be pretty friendly. It definitely getting a sense for what it is. Plan deep dives with each one of them afterwards, for a couple of different reasons. One obviously is to validate, their summarized forecast, and forecast is really important when you're taking the seat. So you know what you're really getting into. And second, to assess the individual capabilities of each one of those people leaders when it comes to forecast, recommendation. That I think is critical for anybody who's coming into a revenue leadership position, to understand that their direct reports are as capable as you expect them to be. And personally, I expect my direct reports to be better at it than I am, right? So I want for them to understand the weeds and to be able to do it and defend every position that they have. And I also want them to respect some of the stupid questions that I'll ask, because that's really just taking us where we need to get to. So that gives you a pretty good direction.
Right. Yeah.
One last step that I would take. Well, immediate changes, if there would be any, right? If I was to take the seat, or put somebody in the seat, I don't think that I would recommend heading in like a wrecking ball to any new position. It doesn't matter if it's revenue, it doesn't matter if it's finance, it doesn't matter if it's ops, unless there's a nuclear bomb that just went off and you need to clear the way. But
Sure.
I think that there should be changes almost immediately, and those changes should be that leader's preference for cadence, process, and reporting. And that should be like a very first day kind of a thing. You've done your introduction, and you're introducing what the cadence is going to be, defining the expectations and the timing, and just make sure that you as the revenue leader, I as the revenue leader, am plugged in to the sales organization as a whole, not just the leaders. So there's that.
Well, you said a lot of very, very interesting things, and I'd love to unpack some of these things if that
Sure.
makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned understanding the total TAM, and you made a very deliberate and thoughtful point about separating the TAM from the serviceable addressable market, and then you said something even more interesting, which is, the IC. This is not the same as the ICP, and then
It's not.
you talked about today, tomorrow, and next year's ICP. What have you found as a good way of understanding the TAM? The people talk about top-down, bottoms-up approach of TAM. Do you have a different approach? Do you have any thoughts about how would you think about the TAM of any company like that?
Because I've worked in the post-acute space, right? There are multiple data warehouses and purveyors of information that allow me to get a view of the entire sphere of the addressable market, right? So I can get a list of every single facility, ownership, and connection, you know what I mean, across the entire market. I think it's really important, regardless of what business you're in. If you're in a business that allows you basically to go out to any small or mid-sized business, or even very large enterprises, I think that becomes a little bit more difficult. You need to get very ruthless with the verticals. Identify which verticals you actually can provide the most value to early on, and begin to dive into that to identify ideal client profiles. Even if the market is so broad, you could probably plug into any company, right? You could just go cold call in any downtown city. The buildings are there. There's probably 300 buildings within 4 square blocks. I think it's really important to identify, in a scenario like that, what the highest priority vertical is, and then looking at the highest priority vertical, distill that as ruthlessly as you possibly can to the clients inside of that vertical that could see an immediate need right away, and that your pitch is just is flowing from a place that they want to hear every single time, rather than subjecting every single sales guy to 400 no's instead of 100 to get to one yes. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach you outlined is really good for prioritization, and that's key, because all of us just have 24 hours in a day. So if a salesperson is getting 400 rejections versus 100, that means they're spending their time more wisely. Well said. You also highlighted getting together with your sales leaders and getting a roll up of all of their view of the forecast. This is admittedly a loaded question, but tell me, how much weightage do you place on a roll-up forecast that comes from your sales leader versus what is there in the company CRM? Like, how would you balance that?
Well, I think the company CRM should be it should validate what the sales leaders are bringing to the forecast discussion anyway, from a summary perspective. You have to, at the end of the day, the mission is to be able to rely on 100%, 99.9% what the CRM has to offer in terms of data. And those are the metrics that you're going to use, going forward in multiple, arms of whatever the role is from a revenue perspective. But, I have to prioritize what the leaders are bringing to me. I have to understand it, and I have to validate. It's a big piece of the process. I mean, they summarize what their forecast is going to be for this quarter and next, depending on what the method is. Could be this half and next, or could be this fiscal year and next fiscal year, depending on where you're at. Most teams are quarter to quarter. I want to make sure that what I'm seeing in the CRM matches up to what the summary forecast is from each of the people leaders. And if it doesn't, that's a very quick and easy way to get into the deep dive, next steps, right? And if it is supported, and you still have questions, and there are still, dingleberries or, loose strings, whatever you want to call them out there, you can get in there and start clipping them away and trimming back and really finding out. I think any revenue leader, should take the position that their job is to hedge backwards against what their leadership is telling them, and also to bring them with you along that trip, because at some point, 90, 180, maybe even 365 days in, all of your leaders should be giving you the information from a position of strength that you believe, support, and understand and develop yourself, because you're going to be putting your neck on the line every single time you tell it to the board or the CEO, or both.
Very, very well said. So on this topic that we were talking about of the 90-day plan, before we wrap up, I just wanted to summarize one last comment you made. And pardon me if I didn't quite catch it right, but I think you are suggesting don't make any radical changes in the first 90 days. Just be on the listening post, listen, understand, and don't make any I think that's what you said.
That's exactly what I said. I think it's important to be abrupt in terms of what your expectations are in terms of cadence and process and reporting, right? So, I'm one of those guys that kind of adheres to that thing. I like to have a Friday morning call that goes for about an hour, hour and a half. Let the guys out there that hate meetings for the sake of meetings, hate on me altogether. But the Friday kickoff is important to me. A lot of times I'm communicating up the chain, across the chain on Friday afternoons before end of business. So I want to make sure that I understand where we're at. I also want to make sure that everybody understands what the expectations are when they come to that call. It's not just me like this, where I'm just talking and talking and talking. Mostly I want to be listening. So, I set that up and let people make their decisions one way or the other from there. That's the biggest change, I think. I don't think you should come in like a wrecking ball. I think a lot of people do. I've seen it happen. And it's not inducive to wins near term with a new leader who just comes in and starts firing people or changing roles up. It's really important to make sure that you take a look at the structure of your org and you've got the right people in the right place. But the first 90 days has you shouldn't be doing that. You take that time to assess. So
I like the Friday meeting thing. I mean, it's giving me, by the way, just so some ideas on how I can restructure my own workflow. So thanks for that tip. I'm getting some ideas here.
Between you and I think Monday morning meetings are bullshit, and I think that all the sales guys think it too, right? So if you need to edit out that comment later, fine. But nobody wants to wake up on Monday morning, have 2 cups of coffee, and then get on a video call with the boss or the boss's boss, or they don't want to do that. They want to work, and sometimes it takes people a little bit to roll into scaling up the activities for what they're going to do for the week. So I think Friday is the best time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, Monday morning, you want to be, if you're an SDR, you want to be prospecting. If you're an AE, you want to go, send an email to your customers, build relationships, things like that.
And if you're if you're a sales guy, you want to have had the opportunity to travel on Sunday night to get to Monday meetings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you're going to travel on Monday morning, the last thing you want to do is always be telling the boss, I couldn't travel on Sunday night, but I can't be on a meeting on Monday morning because I had a 6 a.m. flight. So Fridays are just, in my guesstimation, the best.
I love that. That's cool. So let's change gears a little bit.
Sure.
You've had a very long and illustrious career. And tell me, what are some fundamental and drastic changes that you've seen in the world of sales and marketing, overall CRO space, throughout your career?
Um, I've seen a terrible amount of change. I've seen shifts. Let's talk about it from
Let's
that
talk.
perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, I started as a sales guy. I'm one of those people that was a sales guy first. My very first job was an inside appointment setter when I was 15 years old, right? So, I've been that sales guy. My father was a sales trainer, a national sales trainer growing up. So I was always exposed to sales. I've just always been that guy. One of the things that I've seen that's the biggest shift, and it's weird that I see it in my lifetime because I don't feel like I'm that old, but I'm definitely turning to one of the old guys, is that revenue planning used to be, and it still is to some degree, a top-down dictation from
Mhm.
finance and ops.
Mhm.
Um, and I grew up and came, became a sales professional in that environment. Um, I think it was wrong from the very beginning. To be perfectly honest, I think that the advent of the chief revenue officer, even a chief sales officer, in conjunction with maybe a chief of rev ops or something like that, I think that works really well because it gives the ads team a seat at the table where they really didn't before. They would just basically be dictated to offer up some kind of an excuse for why it's wrong, but then be told it was right and just go ahead and execute. That's the single biggest shift. I think that I see. I'm working with a lot of startups recently, talking with a lot of founders, and what I'm seeing is a willingness early on, to have somebody that's at the table that knows what's going on, so that they're no longer just a victim of whatever the sales organization can bring to them at the end of every quarter or every year. They're a player and they have a lateral voice that they can rely on to communicate to them what the forecast should be and what the investors should actually know. So I think that's the shift that I've seen. I think we're probably going to see it a lot more, considering startups are the ones that are going to be in business for the next 100 years. The ones that succeed, and if that culture continues to proliferate, I think it's probably the best shift that I've seen. I mean, there's always been, the sales guys that started a company and kind of ran it like a BP sales, almost like a CRO. But in a lot of cases, coming up, that's the shift that I've seen, and I like it. So there's that.
You're actually talking about a really, really fundamental change. Now, I'll be honest here. I've always thought about this shift from just a VP of sales. Like 15 years ago, we didn't have that many CROs in the industry. Like
Oh,
there
geez, I
is,
didn't have
yeah,
any as far as I know. Right.
yeah, it's a new thing, and I've always wondered, what is driving this change? And I think you've hit the nail on the head that this is not just a change in title. This is not my skeptic, the skeptic in me was always like, this is just a what they say, title inflation. Like people wanted to be a C-suite, so it's just another C-suite. That's what I always thought. That was the skeptic in me. But I think you're hinting on something very important, that this brings together two different disparate functions in the company, not disparate, but kind of like disjointed, so to speak, marketing and sales. And now it gives the ads guy a seat at the table. Yeah.
100%. Listen, you used to have vice presidents of sales and marketing, and to a certain extent, that brings sales and marketing together. What the revenue office brings together is ads, retention, marketing, and rev ops. I mean, it's everything, and that's a different role. That's not just a title.
Yeah.
Great C-suite comes with additional pay. It comes with different styles of benefits and bonus and everything else. But it also comes with a lot of different responsibilities. That's why when I'm looking at potential roles for myself, right? So I'm in the midst of a job search. We both knew that. We were talking about that at the beginning. I have put myself up for some roles where I had gaps in my resume because I didn't really understand the difference in the definition, right? So, chief commercial officer, for instance, has a completely different responsibility than a chief revenue officer does. The sales organization may report into the chief commercial officer, but they have a completely different view of goals and are more aligned, believe it or not, I believe, with the operators in the organization than previously said. And then the chief sales officer, you see a lot of people with CSO. That's really just a big vice president of sales. That's the head of a sales organization. They're focused on ads exclusively. CRO has a full volume view of the org, and And it's important to understand that all revenue generation, where there's a CRO in place, it rolls up to that one person who's accountable at the table when things are being reported and when things are being planned. And if the planning fails, the plan fails.
Rob, talk a little bit more about the chief commercial officer. Like, how do you think that is a different role from the chief sales officer?
Chief commercial officer is looking at different avenues that your service can be rolled out into and commercialized and commoditized, and then
Yeah.
creating additional revenues. I think really important role. I think in a company that's early on that has multiple options, right? So, a company that can sell services to physician groups, for instance, and make them more efficient and drive outcomes that'd be great for the organization they contract with, but also can be sold directly to facility operators, the physician's customers, right? And even to, say payers in the healthcare space, right? So they've got these 3 places that they can bring revenue to, and you might hire, someone who heads up ads in that organization to focus on the one thing where they know that they can be really good, and that person has a role in the company, and they should be employed. But a commercial officer is looking at a much broader view of the business and what the future should look like, and frames the planning. It's more of a strategic role, than I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. That's a revenue officer or a sales officer, because they're pretty strategic too.
Totally makes sense. And thanks for filling in that gap. This is actually a good segue to the next thing. We're talking about revenue here. I'm sure it's happened multiple times since the dawn of humankind. It's going to happen till we are selling things. Companies miss revenue targets. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you do revenue planning, and what do you do what should you do when a company misses its revenue targets? How do you go about debugging that?
I think you should be ahead of it, from just a basic, from an ads perspective, right? You should be ahead of that. You should know that, whether you need, 2 times coverage, 2.5 times coverage, 3.5 times coverage to hit your number, doing sales math, right? I mean, it's all math. That's what we're all pulling out of the CRM, and that's what we're building our dashboards around. If you were there, then it's time to take it down one more level, right? Start getting into the weeds, just like you expect your sales leaders to do. We covered the beginning, but getting really, really weedy. If you've got coverage and you've got a forecast that supports the data that's in the CRM and you're still missing, it's really important to look at that coverage and find out if it's the coverage that you should be seeking, and you should have been seeking, during the process. Doing postmortem is really difficult when you've missed, and you start to get a little bit shaky, even if you're confident in your work, because you know that you're accountable, to that. So it doesn't change the fact that you need to go into it. You need to check that coverage. You need to make sure that coverage is exactly what you planned, and if it was, then you need to go back to the ideal client profile and decide whether or not that was the right position to take. I think missing, that's a root cause, right? So if you take it down to that level, and the coverage was right, the cadence was right, people were making the calls, you had the appointments on the books, you've got a conversion problem. If you've got a conversion problem, you probably got the wrong people in the market, or you don't have the right product market fit, and you really need to look at that and find out if the plan from the beginning was a solid one, and taking for granted that it was is probably a people issue, and distilling to the right people, and identifying candidates for deselection during that process shouldn't be real difficult. My experience says you can usually find them pretty quick. That's it from the 50,000-foot view down. It's not that terribly complex.
Yeah, no, I agree. But tell me this, please. At what level of the organization is it appropriate to do a pipeline or an opportunity post-mortem? Like, if an opportunity, we've all been in this place where an opportunity that we thought was a sure thing doesn't close. Is it the CRO that should be diving into strategic opportunity debugging, diagnosis, the sales leader, the territory manager, the AE? Where does it have its place?
It depends on the sale. It depends on the product or service that you're selling. If that product or service has a $50 million contract value, right? I think the officers should be looking at it, whether, you're doing $1 billion in revenue and it was a $50 million opportunity, and, and the LTV on that could be 300, 400 million bucks. You know what I mean? A CRO should be involved. I think if you're going to do postmortem regularly as a frontline manager, you could make that a part of your process. And I think if your people are willing to stand it and learn from it, you could do it at every single layer of the org. But there should be some threshold of value where the officer level, colleague is getting involved, right? So, if you're looking at 3 or 4 divisions with people leaders there and a cascading group below that includes SDRs and AEs, and I think you probably should identify what the value is. And if one or 2 colleagues in each one of those groups is missing even a combination of 2 or 3 deals that could hit that revenue mark, that threshold that you identified as important to review, you could have an officer involved. That really is one of those things where
you used a very interesting phrase, by the way, which is if your team is up to learning from those postmortems. I think you might be hinting on a culture thing here. Is that did I pick up on that thread correctly? Are you talking about the culture in the sales team here at all?
A little bit. There are sales organizations that are successful that don't necessarily respond very well to postmortem. Basically they see it as being torn down, rather than, I think there are ways to do that don't necessarily include a postmortem. You can take it from a purely data perspective and just be ruthless that way and not do a postmortem on one particular deal or another. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I do tend to take, a position that the sales guys that I would keep in the seats and have put there belong there. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they deserve our respect.
No, of course. And I think maybe using the word postmortem is kind of like a clue to like ruffling feathers. Like, you use the word like postmortem, you're kind of setting up that one-on-one with your the sales rep in a very negative way. Maybe there's a better way of phrasing that or framing. I think it's a framing and a culture thing where you're making sure people understand that we're doing this to learn and not to point fingers. And I think that's a big part of this thing.
Yeah, if we set it up more as a missed deal review, that shows what we could have done. Had we had the hindsight that we have now, which is 2020, while we were in the midst of the deal, I think that's a really great place to learn and to lever more success in the future.
I know you spend a lot of time in the post-acute industry, and a very related industry is, of course, medicine. Medicine, and I know doctors and teaching hospitals, especially, they do an M&M review anytime there is an unfortunate or an unpredicted, fatality in the emergency room or the operating room. And I think they frame it as, look, we got to put all cards on the table, including the mistakes that maybe the surgeon made. But this is not about finger pointing, but just so that the discipline of medicine and the learning becomes better. And I think that's a really good way they do it.
Yeah, you're doing your best to ensure the outcome, for future cases that present with similar circumstances.
Sure. I think that's a similar thing. Let's talk about something that we haven't touched upon, which I'm sure is something every board, every CRO is talking about, is how do you see AI in sales and marketing? What's your take on it?
I see AI as becoming prevalent in every, certainly, SaaS, environment. It's, the markets are so broad, so you want to spread the, cast the widest net. Agentic AI in the front is something that's off-putting for me, to be perfectly honest. So if you've got, if you had a model that included SDRs that were warming the market for you, beating the bushes and identifying opportunities, qualifying them for, your higher paid, more valuable, account executives or regional vice presidents, wherever you frame the sales, the individual contributors, I don't think that it's the greatest move, from my perspective, to replace them with agentic AI. I do think, first, you really don't have control over that until after you've made the mistake. It's been brought to your attention. You realize you have a calamitous mistake, and depending on how big your market was, that agentic AI, SDR, has touched 10,000 potential customers. You know what I mean? Your total addressable market. and by the way, from where I should have said in the beginning, I do lay expectations down on my teams at the field level for touching the entire addressable market that we've identified quarterly, right? If it's attainable, and in my business it is, so we kind of review that to make sure as a metric we did reach out to the entire. It's always grassroots, but if we were doing that with agentic AI, I don't see it working. I do see augmented AI. That is, AI that helps sales development representatives, the frontline, sales talent, the ones who are smiling and dialing all day long, right? And supporting the AEs and RVPs. I see that as being very, very helpful. And if the problem is, I don't know for how long it's just going to be that, where they're trying to make SDRs more. I feel like no matter what the evolution is going to be to get rid of that entire role and try to find, the outbound touch bases from a digital source. I see that a lot, but I really do in the maybe call it the next 2-3 year future in the near term, that I would embrace solutions that can help the outbound reps be a lot more efficient, making sure that data is really getting into the CRM and that you're making decisions, you're able to make better decisions and be more ruthless with that ICP definition that I said. You get a lot of that from the frontline guys and the outbounds. I've seen some AI solutions that work not just with the outbound group, but they also work, with your sales talent, that the individual contributors who are making the deals. A lot of that has to do with documentation in the CRM. I get very frustrated. You can tell I've had some experiences in my career where the CRM is just it's crap in, crap out, and I want to hold everybody to the same standard, which is good information in and good information out. Those AI assistants can be very, very helpful, and I think that they can be, if they're not already being designed, to make things more connected and cohesive between those two business units we talked about, the frontline outbound and the RVP AEs, individual contributors.
Right.
And from my perspective, I have heard, but I haven't seen demonstrations of AI that's being incorporated into the forecasting, portion of the business. And I think that would probably be a place to replace. That would be that. Unfortunately for revenue operations, I think it probably takes them out of the game, except for save one analyst, that would stay in and manage that. So for good or bad, that's kind of what I've seen is in terms of trends. I just covered everything, but that's basically.
I think you did, and very, very, very well put. And you used a phrase, smile and dial.
Yep.
Let's take this opportunity to hat tip all of our colleagues that are actually in the job of making outbound phone calls and doing prospecting, because I know that is a hard job. So
it's the hardest job in sales.
Hats off to all those men and women that are, it's just a really hard job.
They're bootstrapping their ways to, life-changing events. When they get promoted from SDR, even to a junior individual contributor, and hopefully they get the opportunity to do that. Because I see those guys that did go through that mentorship as they were transitioning end up being super, super successful. But yeah, man, from a hiring manager's perspective, when I'm looking at an org, I am looking for, the newly graduated sharp, wannabe in sales, folks. And the one thing that I'm looking for, I'm looking for success, I'm looking for appointments, but mostly I'm looking for zero call hesitation. And that only exists in a very small percentage of the population. So yes, it's kind of a high turnover role. So.
Very hard job. So yeah. Let's use this opportunity to talk about something that might be a little bit tough to talk about, which is, now I want to get your take on, have you ever had to restructure a sales team based on changes in revenue plan? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I've been involved in projects that included, resizing of sales organizations. I think, from where I'm sitting, I don't want to deep dive through that. I can say that there are humans on the other side of that, that plan. It's important, from a business perspective to take it on, but this is for LinkedIn, so I just want to make sure that I'm.
Yeah, no, I can respect that. And I can respect that because, you know, unfortunately, it's not just the individual that gets impacted, it's families that we're talking about that get impacted. So I respect that. So let's move
Yeah,
on.
and in all fairness, I've been affected,
Yeah,
by by
all
plans
of
as well.
us.
Sure.
Yeah, all of us. Okay. So we'll change track to something else. Now, a lot of CROs that I talk to, they talk about, departmental silos. Their sales is not talking to marketing, customer success. You kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier on. But is that, I would expect that in 2025, with all of the tools that are available at our disposal, that problem would have gone away. Am I
If there,
not really or not? Tell me.
No, listen, based on the role definition, if there's a CRO in place, they should not be silos. In fact, the whole reason for that position was to take the entire volume of the business, which includes, NRR as well as, ARR, you know what I mean, and combining them together, and CAC. So, no, having the folks that are in charge of, inbound marketing, generation, the folks that are, in charge of outbound, sales generation, and the folks that are in charge of retaining the clients, shouldn't be siloed. I think that in some organizations still is. It's hard to turn a corner. Some organizations are so large and they've got 40, 50-year history, and this is how they've been, and they've grown to a particular size. They just don't make those changes. It's pretty hard to turn the Titanic, right? If the iceberg is there, just plan for the impact. You know what I mean? Everything will be fine, hopefully. But most modern organizations, I don't think that they're in silos anymore. I really don't. But I think when you're talking to some very large enterprise organizations, those are facts of life that they're dealing with every day.
Do you think that, you think that's a problem of people, processes, or tools and technology? Like, why is that still a silo even if you have a CRO?
It's not
People,
tools. It's not
not
tools and
tools.
technology.
Okay.
It's not tools and technology. It's role definition. It's spans of control. As it's defined by the org. If you've got a CRO and you've got those silos for retention, outbound and inbound, you know what I mean. If you've got that, those are the three silos that I would put in. Somebody else might be a little bit more eloquent. You're not doing your job as a CRO the right way. You're doing that. That's too much individualized focus. I think the group itself needs to be tied to one particular. When you're in charge of volume, they all need to be tuned into that same exact goal. Everybody needs to know what the boss's goal is. I don't care who says they shouldn't. They should. In order to keep everybody on the team aiming in the right direction, they need to understand it. And a CRO has all three of those buckets they need to manage, and it shouldn't be that difficult to keep out of a silo. Just shouldn't.
I think you've set the bar really high, which is really good. It's awesome. Last couple of questions, Rob. Sales tech, especially sales tech, very, very fragmented. Like there's tools for every single thing. There's thousands of tools. Love to hear what are some of your favorites. What have you loved to use? What has worked for you?
My inbox on LinkedIn. That's a funny story, for another podcast. But yeah, there's definitely sales tech everywhere. I'm a simple guy. I really am kind of I believe in a grassroots sales effort. I usually build sales teams and organizations to be grassroots, right? So I'm all about that. I gave it away when I talked about touching the TAM as frequently as I did. But for me, some of the data warehouses, the ones that are the purveyors of data, they collect the data, they have it in place, they can provide you with tremendous amounts of very gold nugget style contact information are the most important to me, right? So I don't necessarily want to be the guy that's broadcasting, which system I think is best. I think the majority of us know, and we're using very similar tools for that. I think that's most important for my sales guys. Having the mobile number of an owner and operator is the number that they should be dialing. You know what I mean? Rather than figuring out the Xerox way of multi-matrixed connection, building a story and identifying value up the chain until they talk to the person that's ultimately responsible. I think the sales tech that's available plugs you directly into the owner operator right away, is the most valuable. The ones that can take that and combine it with Salesforce and your CRM are also very,
That's
very
key.
highly valued, and they cost a lot of money. There's no question about it. The investment is a lot, right? So, I mean, we're on LinkedIn. Sales Navigator, just about everybody has. That's a very powerful tool. There are augments, that are out there available to bolt on to Sales Navigator, whether LinkedIn wants it to or not. That can really turn information that you've got into some serious outbound strategy, and tools. So I guess I'm not super comfortable talking about the exact products.
No, it's okay. I think you've already given us a lot of your insights. And I think one thing you said is, I think the best sales tech out there is getting the contact information of the owner operator and just your cell phone. Just done.
1,000%. And I don't care if you're selling into the insurance business or the healthcare business or the education market, or the tech business. Knowing the owner and talking to the owner, or the chairman, the owner is the one that I'm talking about. Even if there's a chairman, I'm talking about the owner. Then you can get that information when you can. Your life changes.
The best sales tech is this.
That's right.
Yes. Well said.
It is. Whether it's WhatsApp, text messages, or direct phone calls.
It's a thing that you have in your pocket right now. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, this has been great. I have one last question, and I ask this of everybody, and it comes off a realization, which I think you'll appreciate in a minute. So I'm going to ask this question. This is my favorite question. In your experience, how prevalent is Excel, Microsoft Excel, or some kind of a spreadsheet program in a sales organization for planning and forecasting?
It's interesting with all the stuff that we've got out there that's been introduced into the market that can change it, right? I used to think that when Tableau came out, it was just going to be Tableau, and I was going to be able to rely on that. Tableau just distills to an Excel spreadsheet. You know what I mean? Everything that you set up inside of your CRM in terms of analytics, you export to a spreadsheet. Even though you're looking at the dashboard, you go back to the spreadsheet because even if you've exported a spreadsheet that has hot links on it that take you to the data directly in your CRM, it's still a spreadsheet. And whether it's a Google workbook, or Excel, man, I think there's a whole bunch of Excel. My life is I have volumes of folders with subfolders that include nothing but Excel.
Same here. I've yet to see any sales organization that does not use Excel or Google workbooks. They're the same.
That's right. Same. Any spreadsheet, platform. One thing I cannot stand is, it's funny we bring this up at the very end, because one of the things that I dictate to my sales organizations, one of those things in the beginning, the process, is that if it's not in the CRM, it didn't happen, and don't try to tell me that it did, right? And that's an old saying, yeah. But it's true up to the leadership level where you're actually pulling out spreadsheets. Like if I see a sales guy that's got a spreadsheet on there, they've got 3 screens open. One's the CRM, one's a spreadsheet over here, and the other one, is information, for Googling or AI search, whatever it is. If they're calling from that spreadsheet and they're marking the spreadsheet and then going back at the end of the day to do the CRMing, that just drives me bananas. Because if I click on a dashboard element, I want to see what happened, 5 minutes ago. Spreadsheets don't allow us to do that. Sales leadership, man. We use spreadsheets at the leadership level. As much as I want to pull up the dashboard and show everybody the elements and all this is great, every single time somebody asks me to drill in, even if it wasn't part of my deck, I'm going back to the spreadsheet.
And same here. Like I said, I've never seen a sales organization that doesn't rely heavily on spreadsheets. And I don't know what to make of that. Just like you said, like the leadership just relies on Excel. Well,
even the guys that are doing big data, they're doing big data analytics. They're using R and all different kinds of stuff. It still comes down when it's given to the person that requested it. They're looking at a spreadsheet.
That Excel is one product that nailed product market fit, I guess.
They did it for generations to come.
Yes. Well, Rob, I had a really good time talking to you. I learned a lot. I hope this was fun for you, but I really wanted to thank you for doing this.
Thanks. It was fun for me. I don't know how valuable it's going to be to everybody, but I enjoyed it.
I think it is very valuable. So once again, thank you, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.